Hello everyone, this is Dr. Jacob Lilly here, and today we're going to be talking about our macronutrient profiles and what exactly that means and how we can use these macronutrients effectively for weight loss. Now, the first thing you need to understand when we're talking about our macronutrient profile is what exactly is that? Now, most people have an understanding of this, but if you do not, simply put, the macronutrient profile is our carbohydrate, our fat, and our proteins that are all included in every single piece of food that we eat or drink. Now, once we get a grip on what these macronutrients are, we can use these macronutrients for a weight loss specific dietary protocol. For example, if you're on a ketogenic diet does consist of higher fat content, so the macronutrient that you are going to be using the most is actually our fat versus our protein and our carbohydrates. That is going to have implications with that specific dietary plan. Now, if you do a flexible dieting approach, like I advocate for, you're going to have an even mix of these proteins, these carbohydrates, and these fats, okay? Now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what makes these things so different. So if we start with our carbohydrate is essentially our sugar molecule, right? When it's all broken down, our body uses it as sugar, as glucose, sometimes in other forms such as fructose, and uses that as energy. Without going too specific into the science behind all of it, that's essentially what it boils down to. Now, same thing with fat. Fat is a little bit different, where we break down the fat into certain parts, mainly triglycerides, and we use those triglycerides for energy, right? Or at least we can use those triglycerides for energy. And that is generally how the ketogenic diet works, right? We're using these ketones that often are found when we break down our fats into these triglycerides and these ketones, and we use those for energy. Protein works a little bit differently. Protein consists of amino acids, which are just specific building blocks for different proteins. And these amino acids we can also use for energy, although our body doesn't like to use the amino acids for energy as easily as, let's say, glucose, aka sugar. Okay, so protein does have a little bit of a difference. All three of these macronutrients, these macros per se, are extremely important in our day-to-day lives. Okay, we use a combination of all these three macronutrients to fund all of these bodily processes, all of our digestion, our absorption, our repair mechanisms. Everything in our day-to-day life, we use these macronutrients on a day-to-day basis. So we do need to have some adequate intake of all of these macronutrients. And that's going to lead me into my next point, which is why I'm a big advocate for flexible dieting versus any certain macronutrient deficient diet such as the ketogenic diet. So when we start to talk about our macronutrient profile, how much protein we should have, how much carbohydrates, how much fat we should have in our diet, we have to understand the calorie amount that comes with each gram of these macronutrients. Now, to break it down even further, carbohydrates and protein, for example, yield about 4 calories per gram of that specific macronutrient. So if you have, let's say, 30 grams of carbs or 30 grams of protein in a specific meal, you can multiply that roughly by 4. 30 times 4 is 120. That's about 120 calories worth of food, of energy that you're going to be consuming. Now, fat tends to be a little bit higher. It's about double of that, at about 9 calories per gram that you consume. So if you eat, again, that same 30 grams of fat, instead of multiplying it by 4, you're going to multiply it by 9, because each gram of fat yields about 9 calories, right? 30 times 9 is 270. 270 calories is a lot more than 120 calories, okay? So you can start to kind of see and understand how these different macronutrients play a role in the total calorie amount that we're eating throughout the day. And with anything with weight loss, you're gonna have to understand our energy balance. You know, eating too many calories is gonna yield weight gain. Eating in a deficit or lower amount of calories is generally going to yield a weight loss. So this is when playing with our macronutrient profile and understanding our macronutrients is going to aid with our weight loss if that is your goal. Now, that is the majority of what you need to know in terms of what macronutrients you need to consume and the amount of calories that you're getting from those macronutrients. Now, you also got to understand that most meals that you will have will include some fats, some proteins, and some carbohydrates. Again, this is not bad. We're gonna need these macronutrients in our day-to-day life to function all of our cellular activities which keep us alive and keep us functioning properly. That is why I personally don't like advising certain macro-restrictive diets, such as a low-carb diet, a ketogenic diet, or anything of the sorts, right? Now, if your goal is weight loss, we really want to get specific with our macronutrient profile. Now, ideally, what I tell most clients is we want to have a high protein diet. Now, that does not mean having a low carb or a low fat diet in response to the higher protein intake that we're getting, right? You still want to have an even amount set across the board, something that's manageable and sustainable. Protein, when you consume it, does help with muscle synthesis and the increase in muscle mass that we get in our body. Now, muscle in our body, skeletal muscle specifically, skeletal muscle mass plays an important role when it comes to certain lifestyle diseases such as diabetes. Now, the reason for this is when we put on more muscle mass, the muscles act as like a sponge for all of that glucose in our body, right? So if we're having high sugar meals, our muscles are going to intake a lot more of that and help keep it out of the bloodstream, which if sugar is in our bloodstream for too long can start to create damage to a lot of our cells, and that's how we can eventually develop cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, diabetes, etc., etc., etc. So number one, when we're talking about fat loss and weight loss, we want to put on more muscle for one of these reasons being it helps negate some of those effects. Now, the best way to do that is to supplement that with enough protein to help build that muscle after you're done training. So that again is one of the reasons why I like to have high protein diets when I talk to clients about fat loss or weight loss, okay? Now, the second part is carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates, in my opinion, are a non-negotiable. You're going to need carbs in your diet. Now, the main thing when it comes to this is how much we should have, right? In my opinion, carbohydrates should be no more than about 50% of our daily intake of our macronutrients. The reason I like to talk to patients about this is a lot of the times when people are eating, they are over consuming on their carbohydrates. Now, this is not to say that, again, carbs are bad, because no macronutrient is inherently bad. What really matters is the proportion and how much in quantity are we having these macronutrients that can start to become a little bit more ill effective, right? With protein, you're not going to get too many issues, if not any issues, with consuming too much protein. Carbohydrates, on the other hand, you can start to run into some issues when you start to develop this metabolic dysfunction, insulin insensitivity, and things like that, right? So that's when having too many carbs potentially can be a drawback. Again, not inherently bad, but if you're not in the correct conditions, then it can become problematic. Same thing with fats. Fats, because they yield more calories, again, 9 calories for every gram of fat that you consume, I tend to have these on the lower end. About 20% or so of your diet should consist of fats. And again, this is because of that higher calorie content. Now, fats in itself are not bad, just like carbohydrates are not bad. What matters is how much you're consuming of these fats, right? Now, there's a lot of talk about saturated fats, trans fats, polyunsaturated fats, all of that stuff, right? We're not talking about that in this video. We're just talking about fats as an umbrella term and understanding that if you keep the fat content on the lower end in proportion to the other macronutrients, such as your protein and your carbohydrates, you're generally going to be a little bit better off. Because the main thing when it comes to weight loss and fat loss is, again, being in that calorie deficit. So if you are on a ketogenic diet, for example, sometimes when people don't lose weight is because they're still overeating, because fat does yield more calories, right? Even if you're in that fat burning state, if you're over consuming on your calories, you're not going to lose weight, or that's when you'll kind of hit that plateau where you drop your first 10 pounds because you're not eating carbs, you're losing a lot of water weight, and then you kind of stunt after those 10 pounds. It becomes a lot harder because, again, you're not taking into account these calories that you need to be in a deficit to lose weight. So bringing that all back around, right? The recommendations that I usually like to give clients is about 40% of our diet should consist of protein and carbohydrates. So if you take an even split, 40 and 40, that's about 80% of our diet should be protein and carbohydrates, right? The last 20%, like I said, should be fats that are included in your diet. They shouldn't be the main staple of your diet, in my opinion, but they definitely should still be in there to, again, complement all of the things that we need to help support our body. Now, if you were to break this down, let's say we have a 2,000 calorie diet, meaning if you want to lose weight and your coach or whatever online calculator that you did says eat 2,000 calories and that's your calorie amount for the day, you basically put that into an equation of what's X percent, what macronutrient is a percentage of that 2,000 calories. Now, if we're to go based off my recommendation, 40, 40, and 20, 40% for protein, 40% for carbs, and 20% for fat, you can easily do that math equation to see how many calories we should be eating, or rather how many grams we should be eating to achieve that 2,000 calorie limit for effective weight and fat loss. So that pretty much sums up macronutrients in a nutshell. Now, that's not all of the information. There's a lot more that goes into the micro aspects of how it affects us internally on a cellular level, but we're not going to get to that in this video. It would be a very dense video as well. I don't think many would be interested, but if you are interested, let me know. Maybe I will make a video on that. But for the general basis of weight loss, for fat loss, and just understanding macronutrients, just know that every macronutrient yields a certain amount of calories. You can understand that very simply, and these calories, no matter what your goal is, if it's fat loss, weight loss, muscle, gaining weight to, go on a bulk, you're either going to be in a deficit or in a surplus of these calories. So understanding which macronutrient yields how many calories and how many calories you need to effectively gain weight or lose weight, that's all that really matters when it comes to counting our macros and making sure we're getting the correct macronutrient profile. So that pretty much sums it up. Let me know if you guys have any questions on this. I can dive more into detail if you guys want. Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys for watching the video, and we'll see you guys next time.